Hello and warm welcome to the session today. I'm Dr. Anupama Chirag Dave, associated with Navrachna University, Vadodara, and it's an extreme privilege to be a part of this short-term training program on a topic which is of great importance, improving quality in higher education. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Jagdish Joshi, Professor and Director of UGC HRDC Gujarat University, for giving me an opportunity to be among all of you and sharing my thoughts and opinion on such an important topic, that is quality in higher education. So with this, I would like to share the screen of my presentation that I have prepared. The entire session has been carefully divided into four important elements. That's four different objectives. And each of these objectives are associated with some key takeaways for us being faculty members. So I'm just waiting for my screen to get shared. So the topic that I've selected for this short-term course in quality in higher education happens to be pedagogical practices in teaching learning process, uplifting the quality in higher educational institutions. All the topics and contents that I'm sharing right now happens to be from various secondary sources for which references have been quoted at the end of this presentation. And the examples that I'm going to share happens to be my own examples of for the various courses that I've been teaching since past few years. So let's look at the objectives of today's session. So as I told you that I have divided the entire session into four different parts. The first objective that we aim to achieve in this session happens to be first is understanding what is quality and why it's relevant when it comes to higher educational institutions. That's the first aspect that we will be looking at. So that is going to be covered in the first part that is titled as quality in higher educational institution. The second objective of the session that I'm taking today happens to be to knowing the stakeholders of higher educational institutions and what are the various developments that have been taking place with reference to the teaching learning process that is there in the higher education. So that's titled as the second part, that is stakeholders in higher educational institutions. The third aspect that we would be looking at, that's the third objective, happens to be understanding what is teaching learning process exactly and what are the different elements interwoven in this entire process of teaching learning. And the last and very important objective that we are trying to achieve is to identify various innovative pedagogical practices that are available right now, which can help us improve the teaching learning process and understanding the various ways in which we can try to improve them. So this fourth objective, I'm going to share the practices that are available and I'm going to share my own examples of how I have been using them in my sessions. They may not be considered to be the best of the practices, but I'm just sharing my own practices with an objective of the learning that I have had throughout the span that I have had in the educational institutions. So let's move ahead with the first objective and understand what do we mean by quality in higher educational institutions. So when we talk about quality in higher educational institution, or rather when we talk about quality as a matter of concern, it's a multidimensional concept and it emerged as a field of importance in manufacturing sector. That's wherein there was something, a product that has been manufactured and there were certain dimensions which could be tested and we could see that whether it's qualitative or not. But now this terminology is widely being used for something called higher education also. So that becomes a great challenge because higher educational institutions, so it's the service that we are providing. And when we are talking about these services and with reference to higher education, there are multiple stakeholders. So for each of these stakeholders who are associated with this higher education, the parameter of quality is different. So defining quality in higher education in itself is a challenge. So that's the first thing. The second is like when we are talking about quality and stakeholder, each of these stakeholders can be believing in quality with a multiple aspects. So that again becomes a challenge, that how to make sure that we are able to manage and maintain the quality in higher education. So while I was referring to a lot of material to identify that what can be considered as a best definition for quality, I got lot many definitions with regards to higher education, but they all were having a different perspective. There was no consensus in the perspectives that were being highlighted. So most of these definitions were actually hinting on two different dimensions. The first dimension happened to be the standard driven dimension, and the second dimension was the stakeholder driven dimension. So now standard driven dimension definitions were like every educational institution has to set certain predefined standards and they have to try to achieve those standards. So that was one of the kinds of definition that was available with reference to quality in higher education. The second type of definition was giving importance to stakeholders. So it was like all those definitions were talking about bringing some transformation in this learning experiences for all the people who are associated with higher education institution. So even if we look into literature, there is no consensus about the definition of quality in higher education. There are few definitions which are talking about the standard driven approach, while few are talking about the stakeholder driven approach. And then it becomes evidently important to understand the perspectives to it. Then finally, there was a definition that was been given by Power in 2001, which said that quality in context of education is just the ability to meet the stated purpose for which the service is offered. So stated purpose is something that has to be having a clarity when it comes to delivering contents to the student. So that is what the definition was highlighting. So now that we have looked at what are the challenges associated even with the definition of quality, let's look at what are the different dimensions associated with the definition of quality with regards to higher education. So now there are four different dimensions that has come up based on the literatures and based on the research that has been done in the area of quality in higher education. So the first was purposefulness, the second was exceptionalness, then it was accountability and transformativeness. And mind well, these dimensions are exactly with reference to the previous dimensions that I was talking about, the standard driven approach and the stakeholder driven approach. So, purposefulness is a dimension which says that every institution has a purpose and we have to try to achieve that purpose. Exceptionalism is achieved when we are able to do something very distinctive, something very extraordinary in the targets that were being set for us. So then it is known as an exceptional approach. So these two, that is purposeful and exceptional, happens to be a parameter which can be considered to be standard driven from the previous slide that I was trying to explain. Now, if we look into the other two dimensions, that is transformativeness and accountability. So, transformation is a word which means change. So, this dimension of quality was stressing about the importance of bringing positive change in the student learning, right? So, the changes that we can bring, and the last dimension was talking about accountability, like the institutions are accountable to all the stakeholders who are associated with it, is what this dimension was talking about. So transformativeness and accountability is actually a stakeholder driven approach that it's talking about. So these are the four dimensions of looking at the quality when it comes to higher education, right? Now, why these dimensions are to be looked at? So, if the research is to be believed, so there are lot many articles, there are numerous papers, there are many researchers that have been conducted in order to check that how we can improve the quality of higher education. There are lot many suggestions that are evidently available in the public domain, but I have just highlighted few important ones or maybe few of those dimensions which I felt relevant to the topic that I'm discussing today with you all. So the first parameter was talking about the number and quality of faculty members. So it's talking about not only just number of people who are there available to teach, but even the quality of people who are there to teach. So that happens to be the first dimension. The second is what type of students are we having? That's the profile of the student. The third is how much infrastructure do we have that plays a crucial role when it comes to higher educational institutions. The fourth was what type of curriculum is being taught to them and how it is being taught. That is method of teaching, where again faculty has a very vital role to play. The next was the examination pattern and the learning resources, like what way we are like taking the examinations, how are we evaluating our students, and how are we circulating the resources to them, what type of resources are available to them. So that is again a parameter that's of great importance. And last is what type of support these institutions are having in forms of the national agencies, the policies that have been developed, and so forth. So these are the few parameters, but I have highlighted three important dimensions. All these three, if we look closely, that's the number of faculty and their quality. Second is the type of curriculum that's developed and the way it is being taught in the classrooms, and the way the examinations are conducted and the resources that are being given to the student. All these three dimensions, the role of the faculty is the most important one. And that's where we need to understand how are we teaching whatever we teach. So that's where the pedagogy comes into picture. So when we are talking about quality, we defined quality, we looked at the dimensions of quality, we looked at how we can bring an improvement. Then it comes to measurement also. So let's look at what are the indicators which can help us in measuring quality in higher education. So there are four indicators that are being suggested. So the first happens to be the administrative indicator, that's the administration part from the institutional aspect. The second happens to be the type of support that we are giving to the student. The third happens to be instructional indicators. So instructional indicators is what are the contents that are being taught, how it is being taught, and who is teaching it. So that is very, very vital. So when it comes to the quality of higher education, instruction, the content, the way happens to be very, very crucial. The fourth indicator happens to be the student performance. So student performance indicator includes aspects like what type of engagement student has had with the curriculum, who was the faculty who was teaching him, and what type of transformation has happened with regards to the knowledge, skill, and ability. Is the student able to gain employment appropriately? So these are the indicators where again there is a crucial role that a faculty member can play when it comes to the student performance. So with this, we have had a good base prepared till now about what quality is, the definitions, various dimensions to it, and the indicators that can help us in indicating that whether we have been delivering qualitative content or maybe that the quality in higher education has been achieved or not. So let's move on to understand and explore more about the second objective, the stakeholders. So why this topic? Because I told you that when we are talking about definition, the second perspective was talking about the stakeholder approach. So understanding who these stakeholders are very, very important. So that's why we're going to look into the second objective as who are these stakeholders in the higher educational institutions. So majorly, these are the four people associated with a higher educational institution. The first happens to be the user of the product, that's the student. The second happens to be the employees of the sector, that's the faculty, that's the academic and the non-academic staff. The third happens to be the people who use the output, that is the employers, who want students who are industry ready. And the last happens to be the providers who are facilitating this entire process, the funding bodies, the agencies, the community, the taxpayers, and so forth. So these are the four different stakeholders associated with higher education. And when it comes to quality in higher education, the perspective of all these four stakeholders are going to be different. So that is a challenge that we, being faculty members, have to address. Now, One of the major developments that have recently happened when it comes to the education happens to be the Education Policy 2020. So there were various areas covered in this education policy. One of them happens to be higher education. So with reference to higher education, though there are a lot of changes and suggestive measures that have been suggested in this education policy, I have just tried to highlight those aspects which can affect a faculty member and a student. So, the new education policy has stressed on the importance of multidisciplinary and holistic education. So, when it comes to multidisciplinary and holistic education, it becomes very, very important that the faculty who is dealing with a subject should have great competence to deal with such type of subjects so that such type of environment can be created in the classroom. The second aspect that this new education policy has been stressing upon happens to be usage of technology in teaching and learning process. So, which we are doing nowadays because of this COVID and this pandemic situation, but this needs to be continued. We need to incorporate more ways in which technology can be brought into the classroom so that classrooms becomes more vibrant and interactive. The third aspect is it has stressed upon importance of research among the faculties, and they aim at promoting more and more research because it is always believed that more the faculty member is doing the research, more elaborated, detailed content he or she shall be able to share in the classroom. So that's the reason why the new educational policy has been stressing upon the importance of research. The next happens to be very, very crucial. That's the emphasis is on the conceptual understanding. Now, gone are those days wherein the education used to be just with the purpose of writing the examination, clearing the examination, and getting the degree. Now, education is all about the conceptual clarity, telling the students how these concepts can be actually practically implemented into the industries and how they can bring in improvement in the industry engagement activities that they would be doing in future. So conceptual understanding has been emphasized in this education policy. And the last important aspect, which I felt with reference to the pedagogical practices, is a challenge that we are going to face is going to be the ability to have creative and critical thinking. So that's again one of the parameter that has been stressed in this education policy. That the faculty members have to have these abilities and they need to develop these ability among the students who are there in the classroom. So these all developments are hinting towards one direction, that is just going by a pedagogy wherein you are lecturing, you are informing students is not going to go well, because all those concepts, all those discussions that we plan to take up in the class are something which are freely available to them in different online sources on different online platforms. So we need to bring some necessary changes in the way we teach, for which we also need to get appropriate training, and we need to be utilizing those training and bringing them into the classroom. So besides this, the third objective that is there for this session happened to be understanding what actually this teaching learning process is. So when we look into teaching learning process, there is a lot of research that has been done in this area. There are a lot many models that are being developed to understand various elements that are included in this teaching learning process. The model that I am showing you right now happens to be a model which was been developed in 1995 by McIrath and Hewitt, and this model has divided the teaching learning process into four different aspects. The first happens to be the contextual aspect, that's the environment, that's the green background that you can see. Then it is the input, then it's the classroom process and the output. So if you look into input process, that's the input stage, you would find there are two important elements. One is the teacher and the second is the student. The classroom process has the teacher, the way he behaves. So when I say behavior, it's all about the contents that the teacher is bringing into the classroom and the way the teacher is sharing those contents with the student. And the second is how the students are imbibing from the content that have been discussed in the classroom. So this happens to be the parameters in classroom process. Based on this process is going to be the output, that is the student achievement in form of the transformation that he or she has had due to the lectures or the course that he or she has completed. So these are the various elements that are there in the teaching learning process. Now, what I would like to highlight is that faculty member happens to be one of the most important aspect who can bring reform in this entire process of teaching learning through the contents that he or she teaches and the way the contents are being delivered in the classroom. And that is why I am like stressing on the importance of pedagogical practices in improving the quality in higher education. Besides this, there are a lot of new trends that are coming up, which can be considered as an opportunity, but at the same time, they are challenges which we faculties are going to face in long run, possibly. One is the demand for online higher education has started increasing. So previously, online education was not preferred much, but now because of this pandemic, everybody has started getting used to this online education. So this is an indication that online education trends are going to increase in coming few years. So we need to give something other innovative method should be adopted by us in the classroom just to make sure that people do not go on for those online options and they should be coming to the university premises or to the educational institutions. The second is there is a demand for international courses now. The traditional courses that we would have learned are no more in demand because people feel that they are obsolete. So international courses have been demanded, which we would not have studied as a student. So there's a need for upgrading that is needed from our side because we need to be having a clear idea about what these international courses are before we deal about with these international courses in the classroom. The third is skill development is more focused now. It's not just the theory, it's the skill. It is the concept that's required. The next is the artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence has started getting into even in case of higher education to make the classroom environment more interactive and more attractive and more uh, challenging for the students. Rather, artificial intelligence is making complex concepts very simple for students, right? So that again is a challenge. Like as a faculty member, what can I do better than AI, or maybe how can I implement AI in my classroom? Is again a challenge that we will have to address in short term. And the last is now the course curriculum needs to be having a holistic approach. It's not just about my subject, my topic. There has to be a holistic approach that has to be taken up when it comes to course curriculum development. So these are few challenges and that are coming up and we all have to face it in maybe a few of them we would be facing in short term and few of them are going to affect us in long term. So how can we manage these challenges? What can we do now is what's an important question. So to answer all these things is the last objective that I had, that's the pedagogical practices. So the fourth objective of this session happens to be the most important objective and so let's look at the fourth objective, that is what are the various pedagogical practices that can be adopted and how we can implement them in the classroom teaching environment of ours.